The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Aubrey McLaughlin. I'm the Director of Alumni Professional Networks for the University of Maryland Alumni Association. We're excited you're able to join us for today's webinar, Money and Sense, a common sense guide for young professionals to manage debt and achieve financial freedom, presented by Robert Savage. This webinar is part of the Alumni Association's Professional Development webinar series, in which we hope to provide thought-provoking and valuable content that will help alumni like you achieve your personal and professional goals. We have a lot of information to cover today, but we will be taking questions throughout the duration of the webinar. If you have a question, please feel free to submit your questions using the question box in the GoToWebinar control panel. Our speaker today, Bob Savage, is an alumnus of the Robert H. Smith School of Business, majoring in production management. He also holds his MBA from Loyola, as well as completed the Supply Chain Executive Program from Michigan State University and the Master Financial Coach curriculum from Ramsey Solutions. He has over 25 years of experience working in the aerospace and defense industries in various capacities and roles surrounding production management and supply chain. Most recently, he served as the Supply Chain Director for Northrop Grumman Electronic Systems before becoming the Vice President and Senior Financial Coach with WayPoints Financial Services. And now we will get started. Bob, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Aubrey. Welcome, everyone. Hope your day is going well. Let me just, hopefully you can see my screen here, and we'll get right into it. The first thing I want to mention to you, thank you for the intro, Aubrey, but I want to kind of put things in perspective. I am a financial coach. I am not here today to sell you any financial products. If the target audience, according to Aubrey, is mostly young professionals, probably recent graduates or soon-to-be graduates, and if you're like me, you're always getting peppered by people who want to sell you investments or sell you insurance, sell you financial products, and I am not here today to sell you any financial products, so put your mind at ease there. We are financial coaches. We work with people to get on track, get their kind of house in order financially, and certainly if you're looking for financial advice, I can point you in that direction, but I'm not here to sell you any financial products. So Aubrey mentioned a little bit about my background. One of the reasons I've been so interested in this is I'm dating back to my days at Maryland. And one of the things that I actually looked for back then when I was a student was something that would give me practical knowledge. I mean, for those of you in the Smith School, there's a lot of accounting courses and economics courses and finance and money and banking and supply chain and logistics and things like that. But none of those courses really targeted you as an individual when you get out into the working world, into your first real job, and all of a sudden you're either you're starting to make some money, but you might have some college debt that you're dealing with, and you're dealing with all these things pulling at your purse, if you will. So what I hope to address here today is to go through the basics of that. Because quite frankly, and I'm here to tell you from experience, the decisions that you make in the first few years after college, when you're first starting your earning years, will greatly influence your financial wherewithal long term. So that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. So if that's on track, let's get right into it. Okay, so we talk about what is your financial journey. I think everybody has dreams. Everybody kind of has, especially coming out of college. They want to get their first job, but they have aspirations of doing something different. And I know a lot of the young graduates today, they want to travel, they want to start their own business. They may or may not have a family yet. Retirement is probably something that's way off in the distance, but you can't not pay attention to it. And like I said, this is the first 5 years out of school, when you're first in your early earning years, are absolutely critical to what happens, and I'll show you why that's so important. So talk about financial goals. For those of you who are now in your first job or second job, you have this classic interview question: where do you want to be in 5 years, and things like that. You're probably starting to think as we go through this, hey, where do I think I'll be in 5 years financially, and where do I think I'll be in 10 years? And one of the biggest challenges I know for recent graduates is college debt, and they're kind of juggling that college debt with, moving into possibly a first home or relocating to a new city, or in many cases for the entrepreneurs in the group, starting your own business. So whatever that financial journey is, the steps that we're going to talk about today apply to everyone, whether you're 20, whether you're 50 or 60, the same basic steps that we're going to talk about today always apply. Okay, so why are we here? When Aubrey and I met several months ago to talk about this webinar, I told her I've seen a lot of young college folks. I do some speaking at college campuses to undergrads. I actually prefer the face-to-face environment and the interactive sort of activity because it does stimulate the questions. But most of the people in the audience, and like you here today on the webinar, as we get into this, you're probably going to internalize it and start thinking about your own financial worries or your own challenges, and they're different for everyone. But my primarily desire is to help folks get started on the right path because it makes a difference. I know I made some mistakes along the way in the first few years, and we'll talk about that in a minute when we start talking about cars. But when I first graduated from Maryland, I had 4 really close friends, and all of us went out and bought new cars. And we'll talk about whether that's a good financial decision or not. So we're going to talk about financial worries. Financial worries are a big cause of stress in today. In fact, it's one of the single biggest causes of marital stress or financial worries. And we'll talk about some of the things, keeping up with the Joneses and some of that mentality. So then we'll talk about, banks and financial institutions, and, they're in business to make money too. So they're not always your friend. So again, why are we here? One of my motivations is to give back. And if I can leave you with a tidbit that'll help you kind of mold your path going forward, then I think I will have achieved my goal here today. I don't want to sugarcoat the student debt problem. Back in the 2008, it was the subprime mortgage problem that killed the stock market. There's a lot of people feel that student debt is the next big financial tsunami upon us because the average student loan debt in the country today for graduates coming out is in excess of $25,000. And that's a big number. And one of the challenges, and I think anybody that's got student debt probably knows, is that you don't have to pay it until you stop going to school. And if you have trouble finding a job, then there's a lot of people that they just go back and go back to school, and they just incur more college debt. So it's a real challenge, and it's something that we want to help you tackle. And it all comes back down to really is behavior and discipline. So what we found is that I have 2 daughters, and I have one daughter. In fact, one of them might have even been calling in. I have one daughter who really gets it, and I have one daughter who's kind of the free spirit. And I don't know that it's a parenting thing, but one of them is really on track to and is saving regularly, and the other one is going paycheck to paycheck. And they're both college graduates, and they both started out without college debt, so they were very, very fortunate. So, but it's all about behavior. Okay, so as we get into this, talked a little bit about financial stress, family tension. Obviously, you probably, since most all of you, I think, are college graduates or students, you made a decision some time ago to go to college. And the whole purpose of going to college was college typically is a return on investment. Typically, college graduates make more than non-college graduates. So you made an investment in yourself to get that degree. And now that you've now that you've got that degree, hopefully you're working in a job in your field. Maybe you're, maybe not, but there's always that. Now you're starting to get out and start making money. So then once you do start making money, there's natural peer pressure to keep up with your peers or your neighbors and things like that. And you know, the guy in your cubicle just bought a new car, or he's he's taking great vacations or what have you, and he may not have the college debt that you have. So there's always that peer pressure that's upon you, and I'm here to tell you that's something that you need to try to resist. Talk about employer-employee conflict. Obviously, there's always the classic job market, if you will. What are you as an employee worth to your employer, and your employer has to make money in business. So there's always that juggling of pay versus value and things like that. So there's a lot of financial stress over there. And the student debt just contributes to that. Procrastination and being overwhelmed. I mean, that's the thing that we'll talk about, some steps that can mitigate any of those kinds of issues as we go forward. Okay, so what we're going to talk about is just a couple concepts, and then I want to get right into some real life examples. And I think Aubrey may have mentioned, if you have any questions, I've got it on the screen as well as you do. If you have any questions as we go through forward, I'll see them as they come up, and if I can answer them on the fly, I will. If not, we'll have time at the end to address any questions. And Aubrey assured me she's keeping track of those. So we're going to talk about debt and savings. And debt is basically, as you know, it's a bill. It's an IOU, if you will, and it represents risk in your personal life. We'll talk about banking a lot as we go forward, and banks lend money, and they lend money to people who have the ability to pay. So, and they're always assessing their risk. So as we get into debt management, the ideal debt management thing is zero debt, but that's almost unheard of these days. And we're going to talk about good debt and bad debt. We're also going to talk about loan repayment strategies. Part of that, I'm sure some of the questions that will come will revolve around student loans. And we're going to give you, there's one slide in here that I hope will be your primary takeaway, and it's basically what Dave Ramsey calls 7 baby steps to financial security. And as I mentioned, those steps apply whether you're 22, 42, or 62. The same steps really apply. They just are tailored differently for different phases of your life. And I'm targeting primarily the folks here in the audience today, which Aubrey tells me are primarily either soon to graduate or in the 0 to 5 years from graduation. So, okay. So a little bit about debt. I refer to debt as a 4-letter word. It's an obligation, and it's a result of an agreement. I spent much of my career working in contracts, and a loan is a contract. The bank gives you X amount of money, $15,000 towards a car over 4 years, let's say, and you have an obligation to pay that back on a monthly basis, and they make money off the interest on that loan. But at the end of the 4 years, they're assessing your ability to pay back. They usually do some of that assessment based on a credit report, which you're probably familiar with. But the credit report is basically a reflection of your ability to pay. So I have an acronym here, and it's DWYSYWD, and anybody wants to pipe in on the question of what you think that is, I'm going to answer it in a few slides, but I'll let you think about that for a bit. But the reason it's on this slide, it talks about commitment, and we'll come back to that. So some of you may have heard the term, and I'll come back to it and I'll define it in a couple slides. But think about that if you've never heard of that acronym, because we're going to talk about it more. Debt can absolutely wreak havoc on your family. I'm sure everybody in the audience today probably knows a friend or a family member who's just been absolutely over their head in money problems, or has filed personal bankruptcy, or has a family member that's just either lost a car or lost a house. Not a pretty picture, and it can just wreck a family. And the banks in that process make a lot of money on your debt. And there's been a lot of things in the news these days with Wells Fargo, with predatory practices and things like that. The one key point I'd like to mention to you today and just remind you is that, you might have a good relationship with your bank, but at the end of the day, the banks are, I don't discourage banks, but I don't bash banks, but the banks are not your friend. They're in business to make money, and you are the customer, but they're in there to make money off of you. So you just have to be wary with banking institutions, and they can kill you on fees and kill you on things like that. Student loans, we talked a little bit about it. Again, I think the biggest thing to be wary of there is that making sure you're making an investment in yourself. It is an obligation. Typically the interest rates are very low, and the assumption is that you'll be out there in the working world and you can pay it off. The good news is that they are very low interest rates, and you can take a lot of time to pay them off. The more time you take, the more interest you pay, but it's still a loan, and it's still the form of debt. And then last but not least, we talk about credit cards, and credit cards can be absolutely dangerous, and they're so commonplace. I know they passed a law recently where they couldn't just be on college campuses handing out, applications where you get a free beach towel or a free hat or a t-shirt anymore. But there was a time when they wanted every college student to have their own credit card, very often with their parents co-signing, and that caused a lot of problems. Credit card debt it makes spending very much too easy, and then the bill shows up, and if you don't have some discipline in your budgeting activity, they can come up and bite you. One of the terms that I use, and it's kind of controversial, but I think credit cards are almost like guns. If you know how to use them and use them properly, I'm speaking of a shooting range or something like that, they're okay. But if you getting into the wrong hands, they can ruin your life. I'm very wary of credit cards, and we'll talk about debit cards versus credit cards if you like. But there's almost nothing that you can't do with a credit card that you can't do with a debit card. So I'm a big fan of debit cards for people who don't have the discipline. Credit cards are, talk about points and things like that. For the people who have discipline and can pay them off every month, then it's a tool, but it does make spending too easy. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about debt, and we'll get into some of the good stuff. Question for you: is there any such thing as good debt? And I'll let you think on that before I leave this chart. We talked about all the bad debt. We talked about credit cards, and we talked about car loans. There's probably the only source of good debt is if you're taking a loan for an asset that is going to appreciate. And I think most of you probably realize there's probably only one that I can think of right now that, depending on what area that you're in, could be good debt, and that's a home purchase. And we'll talk about strategies with a home purchase at some point here in the future too. But the only good debt out there is mortgage debt within reason, and that is if you're in an area where the property values are likely to improve, likely to go up. Now, we've been in the Washington area. We've been very fortunate that property values, even in 2008, didn't really go down much. But if you were in Las Vegas and you bought a house in 2007, you might not think, if you had a mortgage on a home in Las Vegas and the value of the home went down 20, 30, 40, 50%, you wouldn't even call real estate mortgage debt good debt. So that's really the only kind of good debt there is. Otherwise, debt, it's really risk. And And then the lender, he assesses his risk based on your ability to pay. And that usually looks at your track record from your credit report or what have you. So you've probably heard the term net worth, and net worth is nothing any more drastic than your total assets minus your total debts. And banks look at that before you buy a house. They're always looking at your ability to pay. And banks will lend money to people who have the ability to pay. And you hear about people who can't get a loan from a bank. It's because the assessment by the bank is that they don't have the ability to pay, or they haven't demonstrated an ability to pay on time. So banks are very careful about minimizing their risk. And then one of the things they look at for those of the entrepreneurs in the audience that are thinking about trying to start their own business and things like that and might need some business capital, they look at something called collateral. And that's really your assets and the things that the bank would take from you, that they call it collateralizing. It's really the things that they would take from you if you skipped the loan, skipped the debt. So they talk about, hey, what would you put up as collateral? And what kind of assets do you have that they could take in the event that you skipped on the contract? Okay, so now Aubrey assures me we have just a couple little questions there. When we talk about debts, I used the example of the car payment. When I got out of college, me and my 4 friends, we all bought cars. So here's a little exercise for you. Todd buys a new car, and he took a 48-month car loan at 5%. His car payment was $400 a month. He's now paid 47 of those 48 car payments. He's on the very last car payment that he has, and he's got that $400. He's to make the last payment. So what does he do next month after he's paid that car? What does he do? Does he trade that car in and buy a new car? Does he throw a party with his extra $400 in his budget? Beer party with all his buddies or whatever. Because now he's got $400 more in his budget than he had last month. Or does he go out and lease a new car? And we'll talk about leasing in a moment too. Or does he keep his 4-year-old car and save for his next car? Aubrey, you want to try to initiate the poll number?
Sure.
The answer should be fairly obvious.
So we have on your screen right now the ability for you to vote and collect those responses of what Todd should do. So I'll give this just a couple of seconds here to put in your answers and your options, and then we will share the results with everybody. So keep going. We have about another 5-10 seconds here to go. Okay, so now I'm going to close, and I will share the results with everybody. Bob, can you see that?
Let's see, I got to click on the note here to share the poll results.
So right now we have about 5% that say trade it in and buy a new car. The overwhelming majority, 95%, say keep his 4-year-old car and save for his next car.
Sure. So, yeah, so the answer is D, and I just want to relate a story to you about that. Most cars today are made much, much better than they used to be. And if you're buying a new car, there's no reason why that car, if it's not properly maintained, can't last 8 years. So the real strategy to get you out of this dilemma of continuing to always have a car payment is have that car loan for 4 years, and then as you make that last payment, then set up a little separate account that call your car fund, and I did it with a mutual fund, and you automatically have that $400 taken out of your budget and put into your car fund. And you could put it in a mutual fund, you could put it in another bank account, you could do whatever, and you continue to pay yourself that car payment. And in 4 years of continuing to do that, you will have enough to pay cash for your next car. basically what you're paying. So instead of paying the bank, you're paying yourself, and then you have a big jump on the next car. And there's nothing wrong with driving a car that's 5, 6, or 7 years old, especially if you maintain it. Now, the only exception to that would be if you're somebody who drives for business and you're putting 30,000 miles or more a year on a car. That might not work. For most of us, though, that put 10 to 15,000 miles a year in a car, a 4-year-old car, will run another 4 years without a problem. So the strategy here is to pay yourself that next car payment, and then you're positioned to try to pay cash for that next car and get out of the habit of ever having a car loan. Okay, so thanks for your inputs. We want to get you used to this little polling because there's another one coming up too. Okay, so the rest of this, I didn't mean to scare you with all this doom and gloom about how tough this, personal finance is, because it's really not. There's a couple key strategies here for all the young professionals out there. And the very first one on this chart is, number one, is have an emergency fund. And typically, we're going to go through the 7 baby steps shortly, but have an emergency fund of typically, I recommend a minimum of $1,000 because things happen. If you own a home, the water heater goes up. If you own a car and you have a wreck and you've got $1,000 deductible on your car insurance, or there's just lots of things that could come up. I know one of the big trends with young people with, in the 5-year and out of school is these destination weddings. And next thing you know, your best bud wants to get married in Aruba, and you thought you wouldn't be spending a lot of money, and all of a sudden, bingo, you've got a big bill that you didn't have. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend using an emergency fund for that, but I know there's a lot of unforeseen things that will come up, and if you don't have a budget and you don't see it coming, you have to have a reserve. Because if you make that credit card your reserve, next thing you know, you're going to be paying for that over months of time. So as far as a budget, I hope that some of you, if not all of you, have at least explored some sort of budget tool. There's lots of them out there. There's Mint, there's Every Dollar, there's tons of tools out there. Most of them are free. A lot of the banks even offer them. But having a budget that really looks at your inflows and outflows is critical, because if you don't know where your money's going, I guarantee you it'll disappear. So you have to kind of direct it. And in many cases, and most of the people that are just a year or two out of school, you're probably paying rent, you probably do have a car payment, you're probably paying off student debt, and then you got to live on what's left over. And then we're hoping that you'll have something left over to start saving. We're going to talk more about that in a moment. So net worth, again, I mentioned that before, is basically your assets minus your debts. So as you start to build net worth, initially in the first few years out of school, the first thing that you might be doing is paying down your debts. And a lot of times, as the Alumni Association is pretty good at, you got all these people trying to sell you all kinds of financial investments and things like that. And if you're doing that without addressing the debt, you're only looking at one side of the equation. So the first thing we want to do is beat down the debt. And then we talked a little bit like that car example, where you get into a habit of paying yourself first and not the bank. Okay, the concept, anybody ever heard the concept of zero-based budgeting? And really what that means, if you haven't heard of it, is you allocate 100% of your income every month to something. And zero-based budgeting is basically, if you have money left over at the end of the month, then you earmark it. That you look at where your outflows are. You have rent, you have car payments, you have student loans, you have utilities, you have your phone bill, things like that. You list all those, and then you hopefully have some money left over at the end. What you do with that extra money, it might be savings, it might be the car fund, it might be a holiday savings budget. We're going to talk about that in a second. But zero-based budgeting is nothing more than giving every dollar a name, every dollar a direction. So at the end of the month, if you're making at the after taxes and things like that. Most people get paid every 2 weeks. Most of the bills come every month. We like to recommend that people set up their budgeting on a monthly basis, even though you paid every 2 weeks. And basically you identify all the inflows and all the outflows in a budget. Now, if you already are using a budget tool, then this is probably, elementary to you, but I think the key there is making sure that you give every dollar a name and a direction. So listing your monthly, that's the inflows, listing all your monthly income and the outflows. So again, your cash flow is nothing more than your inflows minus your outflow. And then we'll talk about what's left over. Okay, I jumped ahead on this slide already. I've started to talk to it. So your inflows minus your outflows, if you get to zero, that's the concept of zero-based budgeting. And then we talk about things that happen. I mentioned the wedding in Aruba, or holiday savings, or tires for the car, or one of my gripes is car insurance. I used to hate it when my car insurance came quarterly, because that was hard to budget for. I get this bill that I didn't plan for, and it would come quarterly. So many car insurance companies, you can set it up where you pay it monthly, and you can build it into your monthly budget. Vacations are always a huge one, because typically the heart of the vacation season is summer and around the holidays. And if you don't plan for that, that's always a big nut. So you build in an allocation, and you call it your vacation budget, or you call it your holiday shopping budget, things like that. So building that into the budget so that this inflows minus outflows always comes to zero. So you're putting away a little bit every month for those things that don't happen every month, like vacations and car insurance in the case of the quarterly, or holiday spending. Okay, so I may have stolen the thunder, Aubrey, but we're gonna do the polling again. Here we are in October. We're almost to the holiday shopping season, and I don't know whether I guess what I read is that most people spend well in excess of $800 a year on holiday shopping. You might think, as college graduates, you might think that might be a light. But how do you expect to pay for holiday shopping? So there's five possible answers here. Deal with it on Thanksgiving Day, put it on the credit card, and then pay it off through the remainder of the year. Or are you lucky enough to pull it from savings? Or D, do you leave town and hope December 25th never comes? And then E is the last one. So you want another quick poll here?
All right, so again, we have the options up here. It is open to vote. We'll give it about 30 seconds here to make your selections.
So one of the questions here, it's kind of a loaded question, because it's how do you expect to do it versus what should you do? And I'm looking at the poll numbers here, and it's a cross section. Nobody voted for leave town and hope December 25th never comes, but the correct answer is E, none of the above. But I'm happy to see that a big number are able to pull from savings. That tells me that maybe there's some budgeters out there that are already budgeting for that in their budget and have it for savings. So if that's the case, hats off to you. If you're planning it like that, that's the important thing we want to leave you with, is don't just the worst thing that could happen is have you pay it off through the rest of the year, because you end up paying twice for those holiday presents in interest if you're not paying it off on the first credit card statement that comes in January. So good, thanks for your response on that one. That's a very real problem for most of the American people today. That's why the malls and the stores, do all the advertising. Most people spend, those retailers make more than 50% of their annual revenue between Thanksgiving and New Year's Day. So just a huge boost for them in the retail market, and much of it's done on credit cards. So there'll be a lot of Visa commercials coming for that, because they want to make it easy for you to spend more than you expect to spend for holiday shopping. Okay. All right. Thank you, Aubrey. All right. So one of the things I'm going to make an assumption with this slide that a good percentage of you already have some debt out there, whether it be credit card debt or student debt. And I want to make you aware of a concept that we call the debt snowball. And the debt snowball is nothing more than listing all of your debts from smallest to largest, and that's the smallest amount of the debt. So, for example, you may have student debt that's $10,000, and you may have a credit card balance that's $2,000, and you may have a car loan that's $12,000. What you do is the debt snowball concept, and you may be behind in a bill that's $300, or you may have a medical debt that's $400. What you do is you take all those debts and you put them on a spreadsheet and look at the smallest balance and ignore the interest rate. Been a lot of studies about this, that the logical thing you might think would be, well, I got to pay off the highest interest rate one first. That's not necessarily psychologically, that's not necessarily the right answer, because the whole concept of the debt snowball is if you have a medical debt that might be $250, you want to knock that one out, and you build that into your budget, all these debts that you're paying the minimums for. You knock out the smallest one first, and then you move to the next one, and you use the money that you had budgeted for that smallest one, and you apply that to the next one. And you line all those up, and the whole concept of the debt snowball, not unlike the snowball, as it grows and it gains momentum as it goes forward. So as you're starting to pay those off, instead of having 4 debts, then you have 3, and then 2, and then all you got is 1, and you can dedicate your time to and your money to getting that last one paid off. And the only exception to that we recommend here is that you're not necessarily, certainly in the 0 to 5 years out of college, if you have a home mortgage, you're not necessarily in any hurry to pay that off. And we'll talk about mortgage strategies in a moment. But the home mortgage is usually at the bottom of that debt snowball list. But the revolving debt, the credit cards, the medical bills, and then the student debt would be at the top of that snowball list. Again, it's the smallest balance first. You knock that one out, and then you go to the next one. And then the concept of selling the car. I mean, if you've got into a car payment that you think you're over your head in, one of the things you might consider is getting out from under that car payment and getting a reliable used car. I don't want to call it a beater, but I had a beater all through college and through the first year after college, so there's nothing wrong with a beater as long as it gets you from point A to point B. Okay, now next few slides we're going to talk about compounding, and if there's any math majors in the group, they probably already know this, but compounding is financially what we call a mathematical explosion. And this quote is a good one. It talks about, Albert Einstein saying it's the 8th wonder of the world, and the banks certainly know this, but he who understands it earns it, and he who doesn't pays it. So you're probably painfully aware that the interest on credit cards is typically 12 to 18%. And if you've ever been on the wrong side of a big Visa bill, you understand that, because it takes you a while to pay that down, and you're paying 18% interest. Whereas your school debts and your college loans and mortgages are typically in the single digits. So you get a lot more bang for your buck when you're paying that out. The same is true on the earnings side. So we're going to start talking about investing a little bit. I spent most of the time talking so far about debt management and reducing the debt, but I'm going to get into now some of the topics of how to grow your net worth, and this is the key tool to doing it, and it's compound interest. Because as you start to invest, and we typically recommend for young people who are just starting out a Roth 401k or a Roth IRA, that compounding is done completely tax-free. And I'm going to show you a chart here in a second that'll show you how that grows. So this may be a little bit hard to see in the details, but there's two brothers here, Ben and Arthur. And Ben at age 19, not too far from the age of a lot of the people here in this audience, Ben was working, and he started saving $167 a month. And he saved $167 a month, which happens to be $2,000 a year, in a Roth IRA. And he did it for 7 years, from age 19 to age 26. And the compounding that takes place in a growth mutual fund or an EFT, a financial investment for the long term, he started at age 19, he went to age 26, and he stopped. So if you see that column, you see all those zeros down there, he stopped. Then his brother Arthur started seeing that his brother Ben had been saving, and he had accumulated a fair amount of money. He said, man, I got to get on the bandwagon here. I'm going to start saving too. So he starts to save $167 a month too, but he didn't start until age 27. And he saved all the way from age 27 to age 65. And now you can look at the screen. Usually when I'm in the audience with people in a room, I stand in front of the overhead and I say, now who has more money? And I'm kind of showing you at age 65, the guy who started earlier, Ben in this case, actually has a greater net worth from his investment that he only did for 7 years. And that's the power of compounding. So he saved for 7 years and stopped. And I wouldn't recommend that anybody start saving $167 a year and do it for 7 years and stop. But he got into the routine of having $167 taking out of his checking account and into a Roth IRA every month. And at age 65, he had $2.2 million. Arthur, on the other hand, started at age 27, and he has a nice nest egg too, but it's not as big as his brother Ben. Now, you might be shocked by this, and this assumes a compounding of 12%. And some obviously, well, I can't get 12% in the market. Well, over time in a high growth mutual fund, you can do pretty close to that. You can do 10, 11. Some people, I've done more than 12 last year. If you look at over time, it runs pretty close to this. Now, if Ben and Arthur had a third brother, and he started at the age of 19 like Ben did, and he saved all the way through from age 19 in the Roth IRA to age 65, you see the two big numbers at the bottom. One is 2.2 million and the other is 1.5 million. If they had another brother named Jack, and Jack had done that $167 a month taken out of his checking account on an EFT into a growth mutual fund, that number would be almost $4 million. So my message to you here, and every time I show this to college students, the first thing, usually have people lining up saying, hey, where can I go invest $167 a month? The key to this, and back to the behavior and the discipline, is getting on a regular EFT sort of withdrawal into a fund so that this starts to grow. And it's back to that slide before. It's the compounding explosion which causes this. So my point to you and all these young professionals out there, it's not really how much money you make, it's how much money you keep. And there's lots of very, not middle earners that use this discipline, and they use it regularly, and they come out with a lot of money when they turn 65. And I know retirement may be one of the last things on your mind, but I think everybody in this audience can probably find a way to save $167 a month. So that's a key strategy. Now, there's another book along these lines that I'll mention to you. It's called The Millionaire Next Door, and it's this sort of concept. The guy, he wasn't trying to keep up with the Joneses. He drove a very modest car and lived in a very modest house, but he did this regularly. And The Millionaire Next Door, you can get it on Amazon for about $11. It's a book worth reading because he quietly just put money away and put money away, and the compounding explosions that are in your family, and this is the real concept. So you don't have to make a lot of money to have a lot of money. Okay, and I'm going to give you a copy. I think Aubrey has agreed to give you copies of this presentation. So this is a very powerful slide that I want to leave with you. Okay, so if you take nothing else away from this presentation, this is the key slide. And you'll see I have 7 baby steps. These are the Dave Ramsey. Dave Ramsey is a nationally syndicated talk show guy who's he's based out of Nashville, got coaches all over the country. This guy is an absolute riot because his personal life is, he lost everything when he was in his late 20s with a young baby. He had made a lot of money in real estate, lost it all. And these are the baby steps that I think, whether you're, as I mentioned, whether you're 22, 42, or 62, these really apply. And you notice that the first 3 are listed in red. And the reason they're listed in red is that they are focused on debt reduction. So if you've got college debt and you've got a visa debt and things like that, the first 3 are focused on debt reduction. The next 4 are focused on building net worth. So let's go through them real quickly. Emergency fund, as I mentioned earlier, we like to have $1,000 to start an emergency fund because Murphy happens. You know, things just happen unexpectedly, and that's what that's for. You don't just go tap it for a party, but it's for the unexpected. So everybody should try to have about $1,000 in an emergency fund, just to take care of the things that you didn't expect. The next step in the Dave Ramsey steps is to pay off all your unsecured debt except the house. And that comes back to that debt snowball where you list your visa bill, any medical debt, any student debt, and you tackle on trying to get those paid off. Then the next step, and that sometimes takes a while. I recognize that. You're not going to just pay that off, in a month. It sometimes can take a year or two. But in the meantime, as you start to go forward, we like to build that cushion of an emergency fund to include not just $1,000, but 3 to 6 months of living expenses. And if you have a budget, you know what your outflows are, and you've got rent, you've got expenses. So only you can know what your 3 to 6 months of living expenses are. But we like to have 3 to 6 months living expenses in a savings account. It's not something that you're going to put into the stock market. It's something that is liquid in the event that there's a job loss or some medical catastrophe or something like that where you need to get that money. So those are the 3 what I call debt reduction and security, financial security baby steps. Then, assuming that you've done all 3 of those, then the next step, get to the point where you can put up to 15% of your income, of your monthly income, into an IRA, a Roth IRA, 401k, or some form of retirement plan that will grow pre-tax, or grow tax deferred, if you will. That's the key to building wealth over the long term. And it may not even be on your radar screen now, but that's the key to the millionaire next door. The people that start early are the ones that end up having a lot of money. And I again challenge each of you to try to at least save $167 a month that's drawn out of your account and put into some sort of a savings plan. Then the next step would be, it might be saving for a house, but saving for, for those of you who have kids, college education is important. This also assumes that eventually if you don't already have, you might have a mortgage. Once you go through these earlier baby steps, then the next step, if you've paid off all your other debt and the only debt that you have is your house, then you start looking at paying your house off early. And one of the things that we recommend is, I think everybody, when they buy a house, they kind of gravitate to a 30-year loan. But one of the best strategies towards building that wealth is to take a mortgage of something less than 30 years, not only a 15-year loan, even if you don't plan to stay in that house for 15 years, the pay down on a 15-year loan versus a 30-year loan is a whole lot different. It's not that much more money per month, but it'll pay your house, pay more equity in your house, and you have your house, even if you only stay there 7 years. If you've been paying a 15-year loan, you'll have a lot more equity in the house when you move on to the next house or the bigger house. And then last but not least, assuming that you've done all those baby steps in order, because they're always done in order, then you've got a fairly sizable net wealth. And then one of the things that we like is you give a lot of it away then. If you get to that point where you're financially so secure, you've prepared for any of your offspring's education, you've got a good net worth, then you give it to your favorite charity. And Aubrey would like me to say you give some of it to the University of Maryland. This chart is absolutely key. This is the 7 baby steps that all of you can start to use. Okay. Now, one last exercise before we answer the acronym and go forward as we're closing up. If you had a family member or a close friend that had a medical emergency, and I use this as an example, if you had to come up with $1,000 to help that person, or if you had to come up with $1,000 to help a sibling or something like that, how could you save $1,000 within 3 months? And this is kind of a challenge. So I'm transition them in. Hey, there's lots of things you can do with your personal spending. And one of them is, instead of eating out every day for lunch, bring a lunch. Some of you may already do that. Another one, it might sound corny, but using coupons for groceries. It does save a lot. Another one is look at every monthly bill. The one I always like to pick on is the cable bill. The other one I like to pick on is the car insurance bill. There's lots of strategies there to minimize your expenses, to kind of carve out that $1,000. I talked about the cable bill, phone bill. The phone bill is getting to be a bigger bill every year, I think. Car insurance we talked about. Entertainment. Some of a lot of people in the age group of 0 to 5 years out of school, you're spending probably, if you looked at your budget, you're probably spending a little more on entertainment than you might realize. And if you're doing a budget, you'll see it. It's okay if you plan for it, but it's an opportunity cost between what you spend for entertainment versus being an author on the future. We talked a little bit about selling the car, or what I like to say, at least don't buy a new one. One of the strategies that most people don't realize is that many millionaires don't buy new cars. They buy gently used cars. They buy a one-owner car with 15,000 miles on it and pay cash for it because they know that car it's a desirable car, and they've let the original owner take the heart of the depreciation, and they pay cash for the next car. So here's one that now that you're out there in the working world, look at your tax return and look at your withholdings, because if by chance you are having too much withheld out of your paycheck and you get a big tax return, please don't give Uncle Sam a tax-free loan. Change your withholdings. Try to get it to the point where you get close to break even. Some people use a tax return as a forced savings thing. I don't advocate that for a moment, because that's giving Uncle Sam a tax-free loan for the year. So, ideally your tax return should come out plus or minus, a few $100. I like to have mine where I'm only just paying a few $100, because I don't want Uncle Sam to have any of my money before he needs to have it. So that's another strategy. Look at your tax withholdings to help your cash flow, and that would help you save some of that money. And then I think this is the last one, using cash for all purchases. I don't know whether any of you have ever tried that, but if you know what your expenditures are going to be, per week, go to the ATM once a week and go get cash. You will find that having the $20 bills are a little harder to spend than wielding that credit card. And McDonald's, for example, does anybody remember when McDonald's used to not take credit cards? The reason they all moved to credit cards from not credit cards, they did a study and they found out that people in McDonald's who were wielding a credit card when they did the target market were spending on average of 30 to 40% more when they were looking up at the screen and they were wielding a credit card, because it makes credit card purchases, it's just too easy as opposed to wielding those dollar bills. So another alternative is to use cash. Cash is, I could substitute that for a debit card. But again, debit card will make it a little easier, and there's a tendency to spend a little more. But it's coming directly out of your account. Okay, so coming back to that acronym that I had in one of the first slides, I'm sure some of you may have heard that term, but DWYSYWD is do what you say you will do. And so my challenge to you is to basically, if you don't already have a budget, try to create one. There's lots of tools out there to help you. And then one of the key points there is to find somebody who will work through it with you. Whether, hopefully, if you're married, it's your spouse, but find someone who you can make an accountability partner. It's like going to the gym. It seems like it's a lot easier to go to the gym with somebody or go take a run with somebody as opposed to doing it yourself, because they force you to stay disciplined. This is all about discipline. And then if you get your budget, celebrate the small steps in the process. So have an accountability partner and then watch your progress. Okay. So I'm kind of rolling down here, and I haven't seen the questions. Aubrey, I don't know whether you're keeping track here.
I can help facilitate that. So we had a question earlier on when talking about student loans, that is it better to pay off the smallest loan amount because it can be paid off faster? Or is there another reason, is there another strategy that should be talked about when it comes to student loan debt?
So student loan debt, obviously, if there's multiple, I'm not sure I understand the question fully, if there's multiple student loans, you pay off the smallest one first and go to the next one. So and ignore the interest rate. Just pay it off, because you'll feel like you've got this load off your shoulders when you get one down and you only have one to go. Or if you had started with 3 and you pay the smallest one off first, it's really a psychological momentum rather than a financial type of thing. Perfect.
Okay. We did have another question. The microphone was cutting out a little bit. You were talking about a title of a book earlier on. Can you repeat what that book was that you were referring to?
Sure. The title of the book is called The Millionaire Next Door. And I think I have in my notes, the author is Stanley, and find it. I looked it up on Amazon last night because I anticipated a question about it. It's Thomas Stanley and William Denko. It's called The Millionaire Next Door. It's a really easy read. You can get a paperback for about $11. You could probably download it on Kindle for nothing. It's a really, and it's just smart saving strategies and just smart budgeting.
Great. We also had a question from a current student. Because they don't have a job or steady income, how can they best save? They have savings from high school and graduation money, and they want to keep adding to it. I know you mentioned some strategies about saving an extra $1,000. Do you have any strategies or tips for somebody who doesn't have that income coming in?
Yeah, so if you've got that base of money in your savings, the best thing to do is to, if you're in a position to save regularly, the easiest way to do it is monthly. And that assumes that you got some inflows coming in monthly. So it might be a little hard to save if you don't have the inflows. Students, many students have part-time jobs. So even if you have a part-time job and I'm glad to hear you got some savings. And if you're let's say you might be bringing in $200 a month from a part-time job. If you can find a way to put away 25 or 50 bucks a month, the easiest way to do it, in my opinion, is to set up an automatic draw go to your bank and open up a second checking account. And I know I have multiple checking accounts, or a checking account with a partnered savings account, where you automatically have some amount of money taken out on the same day every month. And so if whether you have no income or you got a base of money in that checking account, have it automatically directed into that second account, and call that your savings account. Go back to that car fund. That's the car fund strategy, is when you've done that car payment, you take that $400 and you have it automatically drawn into that new savings account at the same bank, and you have that money drawn out every month. So the key discipline thing is being able to do it regularly. And if you don't have regular income, that may be a challenge. But if you've already got money in the account, then you can just watch it go into that savings account and watch that savings account grow. And depending on what you're going to use that account for, will dictate whether you keep it in a savings account or whether you put it into some financial investment that might grow through the compounding thing.
Great. And then we had, I know we're coming up here on the 1 o'clock hour. We do have a couple more questions that are coming in. So one individual had a question regarding 401ks. There's a focus on 401ks for saving and retirement planning, but how should you account for this in an environment of potentially switching places of employment every few years?
Well, the good thing about 401ks is they're easily rolled over. So you may have a 401k at your work, and you are planning to leave in a couple of years, and you take that 401k for your work, assuming that you're vested by the time you leave, because there's very often a match, and then you do that into a rollover. And Fidelity, Vanguard, all the big funds will take that 401k and allow it to be rolled over into basically an IRA rollover. So that money is transportable. So don't worry about that. I mean, I would keep plugging in the 401k, and if you have to leave, the only thing you got to pay attention to is very often the match portion. There's a vesting period by a lot of employers that you won't get the employer match if you're there less than 2 years, or some of them are 1 year, some of them are 5 years. That's the only. But the money that you put away is totally portable into a rollover IRA.
Great. Do you consider grad student loans to be good debt?
Depends on what the grad student degree is in. Grad student very often is good debt. If it's an MBA, I would think it would be good debt. Again, if it's going to enhance your earning potential by having that advanced degree, then it's probably good debt. If it's not going to enhance your earning potential, then it may not be good debt.
Right. And then in partnering with Credible, so to refinance student loans, do you suggest partnering with places that offer student loan refinancing?
I'm not sure what you mean by partnering with. Read the question again.
So places like Credible and things like that offer student loan refinancing. Would you suggest doing that or not?
Yeah, well, they can have their advantages. Basically what they do is they consolidate. And if the consolidation activity would yield you a better interest rate, then it makes sense. If the consolidation activity doesn't yield a more favorable, you figure out how much you're paying a month across 3 different loans, and if Credible comes up with a package that will allow you to have that student loan debt paid off quicker, then it would make sense. It really comes down to, is that consolidation financially worthwhile to you?
Perfect. And last question we have here, how do you balance enjoying your life now, so youth and energy, and prepping for the future, which is unpredictable and not always guaranteed?
Sure. Really good question. I think the key to that is getting to the point where you regularly, coming back to that Ben and Author example, you're regularly putting away some money for your future and building it into your budget, and then it's kind of autopilot. It happens, and you're in all the people in this audience are in a position where their incomes are probably going to go nowhere but up over the key earning years, and the growth in earnings usually happens in the 30s and 40s. So if you're in your 20s and you set up that automatic withdrawal of, call it $167, and as your per month, and as your income grows, you might also grow that, but you build that savings discipline right into your budget. That's the key. So as you start to, you're always going to, it might be a little bit strapped initially, but your income is going to go nowhere but up over time. So it gets much, much easier as you start to make more money.
Perfect. Great. Well, we have covered all of our questions. Bob, is there anything else you want to just cover or mention before we wrap up here today?
Sure. So I just have one or two more slides here. I hope that you were able to gather some tidbit as you were thinking personally as I was on this almost 1 hour rant. Is there something that you can take away from this to share and to change your life or change someone's life? And I have the acronym here called TACAMO. That really means take charge and move out. So I hope that you've gotten something today that you can take away that'll help you. And last but not least, I think Aubrey agreed to send this presentation to all the attendees. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to shoot me an email. As I mentioned, we're not here to sell you anything. We do work with people. We're financial coaches. We do work with people who need guidance. So if you have a friend or somebody that you think needs this kind of guidance, or you want this kind of guidance personally, then reach out to me. But as I mentioned, I'm not here to sell you. I'm here to kind of give you the framework. But budgeting and things like that, it's not difficult. It's just something that we do a lot of it, and we're happy to help you if you like.
Great. Thank you so much, Bob. Yes, as Bob mentioned, I will be sending a follow-up email today that has the slides from this presentation as well as a recording, so you can refer back to it. Again, feel free to contact Bob directly if you'd like more information or want to discuss your own personal situation. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Bob, for hosting today's webinar and today's session. Have a wonderful day, and go Terps.
Yeah, thanks for your time. Talk to you soon.
Bye.